smoker, but at night it lights up and you realize there's a little bit of flame in that smoke that you don't really see in the day. So we need to, now these times, but at night, extreme drought, we need to be extremely careful. You definitely need that fire garter, that little plate that's up on 3 legs. So when they sell smokers, they generally sell a round plate with holes in it. And it's got 3 legs cut out of it, but they're flat. You need to bend them down and use that to hold the fuel up away from the hole where the air comes in and shoots the air into the fuel. So you want to make sure that because that also then prevents the fuel, burning fuel. It greatly minimizes the chance that burning fuel can come out the bottom hole and hit the grass. And then I always carry nowadays about a 2-gallon jug of water with me in my pickup. Has 2 purposes. One, to put the smoker out, and the other is to wash my hands if I get honey on my hands, so I have to touch my steering wheel with honey all over my hands. But mostly I use it to, and these days, if I can't find a good place to put my smoker out, I'll just pour the water right in the smoker. I'll open the smoker up and douse the smoker fuel right in the smoker, because it is very scary. It's so easy to light a fire. One time I was involved, I was actually working bees, and I was the chief of a little fire department, and I got called to a fire, and I was actually in a bee yard right by the fire department. So when I looked up and saw the flames, I realized, oh my gosh, I gotta go put my smoker out, went to the fire, got to the fire really quickly because I was already right near the fire department. Turned out I was a prime suspect because I was a beekeeper and a firefighter. Both have been known to light fires for different reasons. And so the arson investigator came and asked me to come with him. And I did. I didn't realize that was because he was ready to slap some handcuffs on me. But it turned out that we found the source of the fire was a welder. And then he told me, and I was like, okay. So we have to be really careful. I'm glad that we stayed under control and nothing else happened. That must have been really scary.
Yeah, I'm sorry it happened.
No, definitely, scary. And the thing was, because it happened when I traveled between beehives, and my beehives I have across my property. I was on like my 4 or 5, and I think it either happened from my first to second hive or second to third. So, it's not like I knew and I could have put it out. Somewhere. What I need to do is I need to make better lanes where I keep the grass down when I'm going to walk between hives. And I wasn't sure, is there anything like a pan or anything you put it in when walking around? I just kind of carry it, but I was
a metal bucket.
Yeah, metal bucket.
It made me think that a galvanized tin bucket that it fits down in. But there's some I'm thinking off the top of my head.
Yep.
But you could put your smoker in that, and then it could always be there. Then you wouldn't lose it. Like I recently lost a smoker. I left it in a bee yard.
I found it.
Oh, good. Okay. Yay. But, it might be with the fire danger the way it is now that we should all just have a little metal bucket and even then have it in our pickup, and then carry it. Well, in my case, I use a pickup, but just carry it around. Always put your smoker in it. And that's just where your smoker lives, while it's in the garage out or while it's being used. That's a great idea.
That's a great idea. I'm going to order one right away.
By the way, you left another. You left another smoker after the 303 class. I found a smoker in the grass.
Yeah, I lost 2 in a row. I'm going to blame it on the heat because I hope I'm not losing my mind. But the heat was, I was getting dizzy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was very hot.
I need to start remembering to bring more electrolyte-rich water with me.
Well, and that's the other thing that beekeepers need to remember when it's hot out there. So that's a good reminder. I want to give the opportunity to Kathy to ask her question, and then I'll go to the chat window. Kathy?
Hi, so along the lines of the smoker, I was shadowing another beekeeper, and I carry my own smoker just in case hers goes out or whatever. And she mentioned that the smoke in my smoker was too hot. Mm-hmm. Is that because the flame was too high up in the smoker, or what does that really mean? And how do I prevent it?
So when I light a smoker, I get a crumpled up piece of paper and a little bit of fuel to get started. And then I completely burn the paper up in the lighting process and then throw as much fuel as I can on top. If the smoker fuel gets pretty burned up, it starts getting hotter and hotter. You really want the smoke to go up through smoker fuel that isn't burning to sort of temper it and cool it off. You don't ever want to throw flames or really hot. You don't want to hurt your bees. If you smoke your bees when it's really hot, you'll literally burn the bees or burn off their legs or their wings or something.
We don't have eyelids.
Yeah. So try to make sure that most of the burning is taking place at the very bottom of the smoker. There's a fair amount of smoker fuel on top that isn't burning, and keep adding to your smoker if you have to. I tend to use the donkey manure. Yeah, I got a little. Yes, now I got to have a meeting. Hold on. See, they call me Papa.
All right.
So, but at any rate, you don't want to make it hot. You want it nice and cool. Cool, thick smoke is the ideal. Cool smoke is the ideal. Thick, cool smoke. And so you keep the flame at the very bottom of the smoker.
There's one thing you can do, Cassie, as well, is, so to Les's point, when you first start, you want the smoker to be really hot. That's why he burns the paper. He heats up the air in the smoker before he progressively adds the fuel so that it catches better. But then you want the flames, and then the tamping of that fuel is what's going to smolder. But the other thing you can do is on the top of that, put fuel that's slightly wet, and or maybe spritz the top of the layers, or use maybe some a burlap bag that you've soaked into or some leaves, that green leaves or green grass on the top. And it's going to provide some cooling effect, some moisture, slow down some of that combustion when you run out. But when you do see that blue flame, you're too hot, you're running out of fuel, you want to pack it back up. If it's cool white smoke, then you're good to go. You want it thick and white. And if it gets thin and almost transparent or bluish, you definitely need to either add fuel or definitely need to add fuel is what it is.
Yeah, get more fuel on top. And when you put it out, you might be able to dump it out, and a lot of that fuel just goes back in your smoker. It's completely unburned, but you just want the burning to happen at the very bottom.
Right.
Mostly. And so when you dump it, you may be able to just step on that part or douse that with water. But I'm recommending we all carry some water and put our smokers in a tin bucket now.
Right.
And fire, you don't want to start a fire. It's really can get scary, and it can be, I mean, you can wind up burning somebody's house down or something.
Right.
That has happened to beekeepers, so be careful.
The other thing is, when you use a smoker, not everybody, when you first start, knows, but when it's standing straight up on, and that little table at the bottom that's providing airflow, it's going to keep combusting, right? Maybe ever so much, but if it's creating too much smoke and you want to slow down the combustion, save up your fuel, make it last longer, you are not really needing a whole lot of smoke, tilt your smoker on its side, and that's going to stop a lot of the combustion, and it's gonna almost look like it went out. And if it was lit up properly and had been going on for a while, it's not gonna go out. It's just gonna slow down to a crawl. And as soon as you want more smoke, you're gonna pick it back up and you're gonna puff it a couple, 3 times, just get that smoke going again. And that does 2 things. It slows down that combustion. You save up your fuel. You're not necessarily overwhelming the bees with the smoke. And it's just kind of another little tip that you can use for that.
Smoker becomes a tool that's got a bit of an art to it. It just takes practice. But yeah, I totally agree that you don't want to cook your bees.
Right. And the other thing is when when you're a beekeeper that's working with other hives or other people's hives, or you have out yards or different locations, and you don't want to put out your smoker because you had a hard time lighting it up, and you still have fuel in there, you don't want to put it out to start it over again. You can transport it from one yard to the other, but if you wanted to keep going, I used to drive around with my smoker going smoky, and I thought that was a great billboard for advertisement for our services. And that's great until you start driving at night and somebody's following you and they call you and they say, hey, you got sparks flying out of the bed of your pickup truck. And so in Texas, you don't want to do that. So the other trick is to get a handful of fresh grass and fold it in half, twist it, fold it in half if you need again, and just shove it in the tip of your smoker. And it looks like it's got a plume at the end. Well, what it does is that it does the same thing as slowing down to a crawl, and potentially, if you wait too long, potentially shuts it off. But you still have a little bit of air at the bottom, right, going underneath that table. So it's not going out completely. So when you get to your other bee yard, you haven't burned down the neighborhood, but yet you can pull out that grass, puff it a couple of times, and it should start over again.
But be careful, because I almost burned up a pickup, and I decided at one point it's a lot easier to put my smoker out and relight it than it is to buy a new pickup. So be careful about transporting your smoker lit.
Right. And don't put it near wax.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so I got, yeah, that doesn't fit very well with fire. And by the way, Heather says she's building and selling tabar hives in Lubbock. So that's awesome. I like that. And then Tim says he's selling them as flat packs. I think we talked about that a little bit. So that's really great. I love to see that, because that means we're standardizing the industry of tabar hives. Christy says she puts her smoker in a terracotta pot. That's a great option as well. If you're in a 1 bee yard, and you can just drop it into your terracotta pot. That's right. It's going to snoof it eventually, and it's fireproof. Christy actually had another question. Let me find it. I started going through. It's very specific to her hive. Her strongest one needs a new queen, and she wonders why that would be. And that's kind of what I told her, because yes, there were a lot of bees, and there were a lot of remaining capped brood, and there was some food, but they were potentially, well, actually it was making its own queen, if I remember well. I don't have my notes in front of me, but they were making emergency queen cells, or supersedure, that's what it was. They had supersedures. And so I think she was actually getting the queen to requeen a colony that was struggling, but the colony that was struggling seems to not have made it. So I said, well, you can use that new queen that you bought, and instead of trying to supersede the other queen, is just put it in that box. So that would be one of the potential reasons to do that. Or if you've got plenty of bees, but the pattern looks bad, that's another reason that sometimes we requeen. If there's plenty of bees, but there's no brood, and it's a period where you should see some fresh broods, then you might start wondering if you should requeen. Les, what's your take on that question?
Yeah, I just saw a hive today that it, had built up and it was full from one end to the other. I was pretty impressed. Like, the beekeeper is a brand new beekeeper, and he was keeping the combs all straight. I often have to assume that somebody who puts the bees in a backyard in a city doesn't get in there very much, and they wind up getting all cross-combed. But they had obviously done really well, and now the queen was getting real spotty. Now that could be partly because it's starting to get really hot and they're cutting down on the brood nest quite a bit. But generally, I like to see the brood nest cut down in size, but still be nice and tight. And that's the ideal. And he said that he's pretty sure that queen's been in there for a couple of years. And I said, well, they are going to start swarming. They're starting to make queen cell cups, and they're putting honey in all the brood. And maybe you should just let them. You know, basically, it's going to be almost like they're going to requeen themselves. And so that's an option. If I see that they're requeening themselves, I'm reluctant to give them a cage queen. I'd like to see them raise their own, but you can make a divide and put some of them in another box with a cage queen and let them keep some queen cells and make a new queen for themselves. And then you'd have them to compare.
Sounds good. Thank you, Les, for the additional insight. If you guys are curious, Richard sent a picture of his own metal bucket on the chat, and then Sherry does what I do for putting out the smoker when I leave. I've got a military ammo canister that's got seals, and you kind of clip it underneath, and it's really tight. And putting your smoker still lit in there will snuff it out. And it's a great safe way to transport it from point A to point B. You can get those on eBay or just kind of military surplus stores and things, I think. So that's a great one as well. Kathy's asking another question. And for those of you who are new, by the way, don't forget to ask your questions. If you're wondering about anything, we can help out. Back to the difference between a swarm and a package. Does that mean that the colony that swarmed will build up faster than the package, I'm guessing? Does that mean there's the possibility of harvesting honey the first year from a swarmed colony? Or should you leave all their honey as well the first year? And like with everything else in beekeeping, I will say it depends, right, Les?
Right. So I've seen swarms take off and do really well, but that partly depends on the honey flow and partly on the bees. So you need both really good bees and a good honey flow. And then they can build a comb a day practically. And then you could harvest some honey. Like once you get to 10 combs in the Austin area or 12 combs in New Mexico, then they've got plenty of honey. So then anything beyond that, I'd go ahead and harvest whenever it's available. It doesn't matter how long they've been in existence. It just matters how full they are.
Yeah, so that's kind of the swarm is primed for building comb, and that's intentional on the colony's part to cast them out, and they're really very geared towards doing that with those young bees. When you make a package, you really are the commercial beekeepers that are making the packages are harvesting young bees that are supposed to be at the age where they would make wax, but they mix bees from different colonies, and it might not just all be the kind of bees that would have otherwise departed in the swarm, and they might not all be ready, and it's also very stressful for them. They've been all thrown together into the box and they've been transported, and then there's a queen that got thrown in there that's not their mother. So there's a lot of integration and acclimatation, is that a word in English, where you would transition into a more balanced equilibrium where you gotta regain some homeostasis, and that's stressful, and it kind of potentially delays them quite a bit compared to a swarm as well. So there's that to take into consideration as well.
Yeah.
With that being said, Les, do you have other things where we can discuss where the things that can happen, that can go wrong? There were some of the packages that didn't have a queen. The queen had died. There was some of the nukes where they couldn't find queens, and there were queen cells being developed. You replace those queens immediately. And what are your choices when that's your only or two only colonies that you've gotten?
Yeah, well, if the queen came dead the best thing would be to take a picture of it with your phone these days, and then write to or call the breeder, because they should have some queens ready to send off just for that purpose. And if you get her quick enough, and if the bees stay, because often they don't, if there's no queen, they're much less inclined to stay in the hive.
Mm-hmm.
But if they stay, hopefully you get the new queen in time and go ahead and introduce her. If you can get them any brood from another hive, that may give them a chance to start a queen cell. If you've already got queen cells, I would just go with the queen cell. If it's a good looking queen cell or two of them, I just say, okay, they've been requeened with a queen cell.
Mm-hmm.
And that's still fine if you've got one that fits and everything. There's lots of things that can go wrong. And most queen breeders are reserving some queens just for that purpose, that they're going to send to you pretty quickly if you say, look, here's a picture of the queen. She came back. She came in the package dead. And then they'll say, we're sorry. And here they'll send you a new one. Yeah, and then, just a matter of trying to let her sit calmly in there and then let her out. Make sure she gets out peacefully,
Mm-hmm.
and let her start laying some eggs.
So just another consideration. So a lot of the people that were getting their new bees were saying, well, the queens didn't get accepted. It sounded like there was a lot more of that this year, and that can happen. So you can facilitate the acceptance of a queen by feeding the colony as well, right? So that very often helps make up for what the bees are blaming the queen for. And they're like, oh, you threw us into that box, or you transported us, and this is all your fault, and we're going to ball you, and this is not cool. But if you feed them, that might distract them from doing that, and that actually does help with the queen's acceptance. The other thing that you can do, if you've got a queen in colony that's not accepting queens, replacement queens very easily, is to use a pushing cage. You put some 1/8 of an inch mesh wire fabric, and then you make a little makeshift cage that you push over capped brood with a queen underneath, without smooshing her, obviously, and an area that's big enough for her to kind of walk around. It might even have some space for her to lay some eggs. But the capped brood is going to emerge, and those baby bees they don't have any allegiance to any queens, and they're going to adopt her. It's like, a goose that sees you, you're the first person they see. Well, they're going to adopt you as their mother, right? Well, they're doing the same thing with that queen, and they're going to feed her, groom her, take care of her, and they're going to be taken care of by the rest of the nurse bees in the colony, which through trophallaxis, the exchanges of those queen mandibular pheromones are going to get transferred out, and they're going to start accepting her as their queen. But very often what happens is a lot of reluctancy for a colony to not accept a new queen when the subspecies or the kind of bees that you have, the further out they are from each other, like Italians and local survivor stock from Texas with Africanized genetics, it gets harder and harder for them to accept the new queen. So there's that to be taken into consideration as well. With that, I see a question from Richard. And while I'm asking Richard for his question, you guys think about the kind of things that you need help with. I'm sure that with the spring and those new bees everywhere, there's a lot of things happening. So this is what we're here for. Think about what we can help you with. Richard.
Thanks, Natalie. So my bees, I installed them nearly a year ago, and I said, okay, for this, I'll feed them for the first year, which I did. And I would say about a month or so ago, I pretty much stopped. And my last inspection showed plenty of honey. In fact, they're building comb, and they're actually storing even more honey, which was surprising. But my question is, how do I know to feed them? Like, I don't want to feed them unless it's an emergency. How can I tell if it's an emergency?
That's a great question. Thank you, Richard. So emergency means several different things to different people, right? First of all, I'm going to clarify, we're probably talking about sugar syrup in this case, right? You're asking what because we don't recommend the pollen supplements or anything else like that, but there's emergency when they don't have any carbs and they can't, there's the fuel, they can't go and they can't feed their young, they can't do anything because they got no energy. And when you see that your comb is dry as bone and there's no food in there, they're obviously starving, right? And it's kind of like a skin on bones. And at that point, you want to see some moisture, some nectar, some liquid in those cells for them to have something to eat. Les, what's your threshold over the years? Has it changed, and what's your current threshold?
Yeah, well, it has changed because I'm in the hill country quite a bit these days. And it's tough. The hill country is a tough place to keep bees. And so when I'm mostly in top bar hives, but it doesn't really matter if you're in a Lang or a top bar. When I get through, when I get to the combs, you can see where the bees are. Where there's no bees, there's nothing. That's just beeswax. You can pretty much take it out to get it out of the way to give yourself room to work, but there's not going to be anything in it. When you start getting the bees, there should be quite a bit of honey, a little arch of honey, and you can tell where it is because you'll see the bees sticking their heads in it and their butts sticking up. Mm-hmm. That means they're eating honey. And there's often an area in the middle, like a little dome-shaped area, where you don't see that because that's brood, and the smoke has caused them to scurry off and go eat honey. If you don't see any honey in the beehive, then you better feed them pretty quick. If you don't see any nectar or any honey, then they're obviously in bad shape. If you see very, very little, still, I would feed them. If I have a comb or two with a fair amount of honey on them, I don't worry about it. I tend to push them towards, being a little bit hungry, because if you feed them too much and all the time, then they get to be raising a big brood nest that you're going to have to keep feeding. So you don't want to artificially overdo it. You want to let them ride a little bit towards hungry, but not get into starvation.
So does that help, Richard? Does it give you a better idea?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. If I may, just a quick comment for lighting your smoker. Be Mindful has got a great YouTube video on it.
Oh, that's funny. Yes, that's right. It's really very short. Good. It's very short.
Yes, but to me, it's the best, lighting your smoker video I've seen.
Well, thank you. Well, the goal is to not spend 20 or 30 minutes lighting your smoker every time, right? You want to do it in less than 5 minutes, like Les has taught me. You want to get the fire going. You want that heat before you start packing small. And so, yeah, go to the YouTube channel and take a look. By the way, we're going to start, and I don't know if you've noticed, we're doing it today. We're broadcasting live on YouTube on our channel as well. So there's another option for you guys. I've got a question for Sherry. She says, curious about your rescue bars. So this is a great question because we with top bars and natural comb, a lot of that is needed, especially when you first install a package or you're not necessarily guiding them straight and they've got cross combing or something like that. So she's like, finally found some rabbit wire to use. We use rabbit caging that we get from farming store, and it's just 1 inch by 1/2 inch, and it's fairly stiff. It's very almost hard to bend the teeth on there. So do you keep the bars in the hive indefinitely, or do you cycle it out as soon as possible? We keep it in there, right? Once you've hung the comb on the rescue bars, the repair bars, the bees will reattach the top of it to the bottom of the bar. And so, I mean, unless the comb is getting eaten by wax moths and is no good and needs to go, we'll leave it in there forever, right? How do you attach it to the bars? You can use several ways depending on what you've got. We're using a power stapler. or a hand stapler, like a for whatever, for constructions, Home Depot kind of a stapler, heavy duty. There you go, heavy duty staplers. You could even use potentially some screws or some nails if you're handy and clever, and you can attach it that way. But the permanent attachments are the best. And then she's assuming that we're attaching it to flat bars and not bars with guides. That's correct. And we're going to put up some videos on YouTube as well on how to do this. And there's already a little bit of a photo step-by-step how to in photos, both on our Instagram and on the plans page on our website. So if you're curious to see what the process is, it's got the stapler and everything, and it's step-by-step. So take a look. Naveen says, I understand you also need to feed your bees in the fall when you see that in the bird's nest, there's not a band of honey at the top of the comb. That's because the bees will overwinter inside the bird's nest. And if it gets cold, they can't go back out of the hive honey stores to get honey. To help them build up honey bands in the bird's nest, you feed in the fall. That's what I read. It always depends. You have to look in your hive. You have to see what's going on. Les, can you talk to the fact that you've got to really know what's going on and adapt accordingly. And you don't necessarily have to feed unless there's an emergency. And even then, you get to decide what you want to do with your bees, right?
Often, if you watch the brood nest, it starts off in the winter very, very small. Maybe even there might be no brood nest briefly once in a while. And then it begins to grow a little bit. In the spring, it grows quite a bit. Even with every comb that there's bees, there's brood. And then sometime in the summer, it starts to collapse a little bit. And then in the fall, it gets quite a bit smaller. And ideally, as it contracts, they backfill where the brood hatched out with honey. So they're kind of taking care of that themselves. And then that means that they're embedded in their winter cluster. It's pretty much surrounded by honey with a little bit of pollen mixed in. And then they can just slowly migrate back and forth around on the combs into honey stores. And they take care of that themselves very well. The only problem that could happen is if you're in an area that just doesn't have any fall flowers. So as they contract, there isn't much to backfill with. And that's where you might need to feed. But there seems to often be some fall flowers. Here in the hill country, there's a little bit of flowers even in, December sometimes. So it just depends on whether or not they've gotten able to backfill. And that depends on your flowers in your area where you are. I assume in Houston, where I think you are, that there is quite a bit of flowers blooming in the fall there too. So you shouldn't need to feed them automatically unless there's just no honey in the hive.
She's giving you a thumbs up, so that's all good. So we got a couple minutes left. Anybody has a pressing question we can help you with, this is your time to ask it. If not, you can think about some of the questions you may have for next week. Always keep in mind that when you're in your apiaries, take notes of the things that you see. And just if you've got something pressing, you can contact us on the website for emergency questions. But you can also gather all your questions and bring them over to the next week's session. So go ahead.
I'm going to take Doug's omen very seriously, and I'm going to go get me a bucket to put my smoker in. Hopefully it'll help me not lose my smoker.
Right. It's a little bit bigger.
and then we should all be very conscientious about fire as beekeepers, because it's no fun starting a fire.
Right. And to your point about dehydration, that backup water for the smoker and the fire, that sometimes comes in handy when you run out of your own water and you're in the field and you don't get dehydrated. And Yeah. Kathy did get another question for us. I fed a small colony, and when I inspected them 2 weeks later, the hive was empty. The person helping me that day felt that they were overwhelmed by robbers because I fed them. What would be the best step to help a small colony needing resources? And that can happen, right? Especially when they're small and they cannot defend that extra basically open sugar syrup from robbers. What's your take on that, Les?
Well, feed them inside the hive.
Oh, definitely.
Restrict the volume, the entrance down to a very small entrance. Do everything you can do to prevent robbing. Maybe even put up a robbing screen. It sounds like it wasn't a very together hive yet. And so then they weren't able to defend themselves. And the food actually became the danger point because it encouraged other bees to come and try to take it.
Right.
So make sure that those other bees have a really hard time getting to it, and put it behind all the bees in the hive so that they can defend it better.
Mm-hmm. And they might also have been that they didn't have the size that they needed to defend anything, even themselves in the end, right? So they might have just dwindled. They might have been below the economic threshold of survival. And they might have, even with the feed, dwindled down to basically almost nothing. So there's the other consideration there. I think that with that, unless you guys have any more questions, we can come back next week at the same time on Monday, 7:30 to 8:30 Central Standard Time, and just come on by and ask us your questions. And we're here to share Les's expertise, and I'm riding his coattails, so I've learned everything I know from Les Crowder, but we can help you out.
Well,
So
Les and Natalie, I just want to mention real quick how much I appreciate these, and you know from my past comments that I keep in Layens hives and don't keep in Top Bar right now. But I did pick up this book that I found very interesting, so I'm looking forward to reading it and learning more. So thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. Thank you, Monty. Yeah. We really appreciate you. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, Les, along with that book, filmed a kind of a how-to Top Bar hive, or how to, that can apply to any kind of horizontal configuration, including the layers to some extent, in the birds management, in the nest management. But the video and the book together make a whole lot of sense, because it just kind of takes watching Les go through, and it's very telling how slow he moves and how he does things. So there's another complementary thing. If you like the book, later down the road, there's also that option. So, yeah.
Sometimes I move so slow that people want to reach in and help me. Not that I need to help. I could do it faster, but I'm doing it slow for another reason. I'm trying to keep the bees calm.
Right. So you don't get stung. Sherry says she's got both the book and the DVD, and it's a great resource. Thank you, Monty, for your kind words. We really appreciate you. We appreciate every single one of you and your really relevant questions. It helps everyone. And so thank you, guys. Come on back. And thank you, Les, above all, for sharing your time and your expertise with us.
Thank you, Natalie, and goodbye, everybody. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks. Bye.